A ceasefire may be holding, but beneath the waters of the Gulf, a bizarre new threat is surfacing. Iran is reportedly considering Dolphins laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz as a US blockade tightens the economic noose. With warships watching and global trade on the line, one chilling question remains. What else is waiting underwater? A fragile ceasefire may be holding on the surface, but beneath the waters of the Gulf, a new and deeply unsettling threat is emerging. Iran is considering unconventional methods to challenge a United States military blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, including the possible use of dolphins armed with mines, the Wall Street Journal reported. As economic pressure mounts in Tehran, fears are growing that the next phase of this confrontation could come from beneath the sea. The strategic waterway has been under a financially crippling American military blockade for weeks, severely restricting Iran's oil exports and increasing pressure on the country's economy. While an extended and tense ceasefire between Washington and Tehran remains in place, anger is reportedly rising among Iranian hardliners. A growing number now believe that the blockade amounts to an act of war, despite the absence of direct, large-scale fighting. Those voices are said to be urging Iran's leadership to resume military action rather than continue absorbing the economic damage caused by the restrictions. The reported Dolphin plan would represent one of the most unusual tactics considered in the standoff. According to Iranian officials cited in the report by WSJ, mine-carrying dolphins could be used to strike American naval vessels deployed in the region. The report also says Tehran could send submarines into the waterway as part of a broader escalation strategy. Any such move in the Strait of Hormuz would immediately raise global alarm, given the route's importance to international energy supplies and maritime trade. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most strategically vital choke points in the world. A significant share of global oil shipments passes through the narrow corridor, making any military disruption there a matter of worldwide concern. But the reported threats do not end at sea traffic. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard has also threatened to cut key communications cables running through the strait. Those undersea cables are essential for international telecommunications and internet connectivity. Damage to them could disrupt global data flows, affect financial systems, and increase pressure far beyond the Middle East. Analysts say the economic pain caused by the blockade is changing calculations inside Tehran. Hamidreza Azizi, a visiting fellow specializing in the Middle East at the Berlin-based research institute SWP, told the Wall Street Journal.
The blockade is increasingly viewed in Tehran not as a substitute for war, but as a different manifestation of it. As a result, Iranian decision-makers may soon come to see renewed conflict as less costly than continuing to endure a prolonged blockade.
He added that Iranian decision-makers may soon conclude that renewed conflict is less costly than continuing to endure a prolonged blockade. That assessment points to a dangerous shift. If economic strangulation is seen as war by another name, the political barriers to escalation may begin to weaken. So far, the ceasefire has prevented a wider regional conflict. However, the combination of financial pressure, military deployments, and increasingly aggressive rhetoric suggests the situation remains highly volatile. "6 months. That's how long the Pentagon believes it could take to clear Iranian mines from the Strait of Hormuz, and that timeline wouldn't even begin until after a war with Iran ends." According to 3 officials cited by the Wall Street Journal, the assessment, delivered during a classified briefing on Capitol Hill on April 21st, left lawmakers from both parties frustrated. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway in the Persian Gulf, is the artery through which roughly 20% of the world's oil flows. Before the war began in February, It was one of the most critical shipping corridors on the planet. Right now, it is a minefield. Iran reportedly placed 20 or more mines in and around the strait, some of which floated remotely using GPS technology, which has made detection significantly harder. Others were laid by Iranian small boats. Officials say helicopters, drones, and explosive ordnance disposal divers are all being considered for a clearing operation, but none of it can begin in earnest while the conflict continues. US President Donald Trump, for his part, posted on Truth Social last week that Iran has removed, or is removing, all sea mines. The Pentagon, however, told a very different story behind closed doors just days later. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell issued a brief statement calling the Washington Post's reporting inaccurate. But that denial has done little to calm markets or reassure the dozens of countries now scrambling to reroute energy supplies. Even if a peace agreement were reached tomorrow, the physical work of reopening the strait would only just begin. That is the part of this story that does not get enough attention. On April 22nd, Iran made its position equally clear. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament and the country's lead negotiator, posted on X, saying reopening the strait was, in his words, impossible.
A complete ceasefire only makes sense if it is not violated by the maritime blockade and the hostage-taking of the world's economy, and if the Zionist warmongering across all fronts is halted. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz is impossible with such a flagrant breach of the ceasefire. They did not achieve their goals through military aggression, nor will they through bullying. The only way forward is to recognize the rights of the Iranian nation.
The same day, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps seized 2 ships attempting to cross the strait, the Panama-flagged MSC Francesca and the Liberia-flagged Epaminondas. It was the first time Iran had taken control of vessels since the war began. The ceasefire announced on April 8th has clearly frayed. Trump has unilaterally extended it, saying Iran's leadership is seriously fractured and needs to come up with a unified proposal. Iranian authorities, as of April 22nd, had given no signal they would attend a second round of talks in Islamabad, where a luxury hotel had been cleared out and prepared for negotiations that never happened. At least 34 tankers linked to Iran have bypassed the US naval blockade since it came into force on April 13th, raising serious doubts about US President Donald Trump's frequent claims of tremendous success. According to the cargo tracking group Vertex, many of these ships reportedly had crude oil on them. But the POTUS believes an entirely different story.
The blockade has been a tremendous success. I will not lift the US embargo on the Strait of Hormuz until Washington reaches a final deal with Iran.
A separate report by shipping journal Lloyd's List said 26 Iranian ships bypassed the US naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz to export Iranian cargo to countries across the globe. At least 19 of them have exited the Gulf past the blockade line. 15 others have entered it from the Arabian Sea, heading toward Iran. 6 of those departing were confirmed carrying Iranian crude, 10.7 million barrels in total, worth an estimated $910 million. Despite multiple reports suggesting the US was losing its footing in the slippery waters of Hormuz, Donald Trump has been adamant that he was going to stick to his guns, or, to be more precise, warships. One of the vessels reported to have slipped through was the Dorina, an Iranian-flagged supertanker that switched off its transponder before navigating past US forces on April 17th. Satellite imagery from March shows the same vessel off Malaysia conducting a ship-to-ship transfer, a technique used to mask the origin of oil. It was last tracked off the southern coast of India a day later. The Pentagon pushed back hard when shipping intelligence firm Lloyd's List published its own breach figures earlier this week.
First of all, this is false. Second, a Dem senator cheering on the #1 state sponsor of terror is shameful.
Lloyd's List, a 292-year-old maritime analysis company, stood its ground. It said its findings were backed by satellite tracking, advanced analytics, and on-the-ground intelligence. US Central Command earlier said its forces turned back 28 vessels since the blockade began, and American forces have seized one container ship and boarded a sanctioned tanker in the Indo-Pacific. Iran has kept the strait on its own terms throughout. Ships attempting to transit without Iranian permission have been fired upon. An Iranian cargo vessel has crossed the Strait of Hormuz despite a US naval blockade now entering its second week, as shipping traffic through one of the world's most critical waterways grinds to a near halt. The Sharjah 2, a general cargo ship, departed Shahid Rajai port near Bandar Abbas on April 14th and was tracked heading towards Kandla port in India. Bloomberg reported the vessel crossed the strait before going dark, switching off its location signal shortly after passing through. It is the third reported Iranian vessel to make the crossing since Washington imposed restrictions last week. 2 oil and gas tankers also transited in both directions earlier, but the broader picture tells a different story. US Central Command has turned back 27 vessels since the blockade began, releasing footage of a helicopter gunner warning a cargo ship over the radio that it had entered a restricted military zone.
Since the commencement of the blockade against ships entering or exiting Iranian ports and coastal areas, U.S. forces have directed 27 vessels to turn around or return to an Iranian port.
According to tracking data, only 16 ships were recorded crossing the strait on April 21st, with around 800 vessels stuck in the Persian Gulf. A day before, on April 20th, US Marines rappelled onto the Iranian-flagged Tuska in the Arabian Sea after the guided missile destroyer USS Spruance disabled its engines following 6 hours of warnings. Tehran called it maritime piracy and warned of retaliation, with Iran's foreign ministry branding the blockade collective punishment amounting to a war crime.
Not merely a violation of the ceasefire mediated by Pakistan, but a criminal act and collective punishment amounting to a war crime and a crime against humanity.
According to reports, Pakistan's army chief Asim Munir spoke with US President Donald Trump, warning that the blockade remained the key obstacle to resuming nuclear talks, to which the POTUS has promised to address the concerns. A 2-week ceasefire between Washington and Tehran expires on April 23rd. Trump has said an extension is not likely, and Iran hasn't budged either. What happens next is anybody's guess.